In the latest flare-up in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the US has announced fresh sanctions on Moscow and the Russian elite after its President Vladimir Putin recognized the independence of two breakaway regions in Ukraine's eastern territory with the intention to undermine Kyiv's sovereignty in its own territory. After US sanctions, Canada and other EU nations are also leveling trade embargoes while gearing up to deploy additional troops to Eastern Europe, primarily Poland, to prepare for the inevitable attack that seems just around the corner now. Ukraine's two breakaway territories are Luhansk and Donetsk, which are currently controlled by rebel groups and are located in the region of Donbass that borders Russia. This area has been led by pro-Russian groups and separatists for nearly a decade. While Biden has repeatedly warned that Russia is preparing for an attack, the US has also revealed that they would continue supplying arms and ammunition to Ukraine, to the Ukrainian government along with its allies, but would not actively participate in a war, thereby weakening Ukraine's position in the conflict. However, to understand why Luhansk and Donetsk play such an integral role in the conflict and its escalation in recent times, it's important to revisit the 1991 and 2013 uprising in Ukraine that laid the groundwork for the conflict today. But the answers to the complex crisis dates further back, even further back, all the way back to the 9th century when Kievan Rus was located in Europe and was home to the Slavic people. Its capital was Kiev, which has remained the same for over 10 centuries now, despite coming under multiple leaderships in its history. Kievan Rus was formed and governed by Grand Prince Vladimir. Ironically enough, Vladimir is also the name of the leaders of Russia and Ukraine today. Vladimir is the Russian spelling for Volodymyr, which incidentally is the name of the Ukrainian president Volodymyr Zelensky. But Russians, Ukrainians and Belarusians draw their lineage from this same Slavic state. Now let's look at the timeline of the conflict in eastern Ukraine and Russia. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union, also known as USSR, collapsed, which marked the birth of 15 new countries, including modern-day Russia and Ukraine. The apparent question that has loomed since is what would happen to the former USSR territories. While some turned to the West and joined the EU and NATO for economic and US-led military alliances, others, including Ukraine, stayed close to Russia. Although Ukraine broke away from Russia, it was historically never a part of the USSR. It wasn't until World War II that Stalin's troops seized surrounding areas and added them to their borders. And despite the reformation of Ukraine in 1991, many in Russia believe it to be an integral part of its country, as it shares similar historic, cultural, and geographical ties, similar but not identical. In the early 2000s, owing to strong opposition to Russian leadership, Ukraine sought to develop its own identity through independent outreach programs and international alliances. 2004, protesters toppled Ukraine's pro-Russia government and repeated the actions once again in 2014 with a referendum. It is safe to state that the majority don't see themselves as Russians and don't want to take orders from Kremlin. While Ukraine continued to grow, Russia accused the US and EU of orchestrating revolutions and overthrowing governments in Ukraine just to divide both nations and their people. But following the 2014 setback, fearing a loss of influence in the country, Russia took over a swath of eastern Ukrainian territories, in particular Crimea, and added to its own borders. Ukraine has been unable to take back control of those territories since. After the 2014 Crimean seizure, Ukraine understandably tilted away from Russia and towards the Western powers, which have since given them weapons worth billions of dollars. Russia, since the collapse of the USSR, has continued to target the US and the EU of arming and isolating Ukraine in order to snub Russia. They've also accused the West of maintaining a Cold War mentality on the issue. While Russia harps on about Western influence, the US and EU deny those claims and maintain that free countries have the right to decide their national policies and their foreign policies. While the arguments, border skirmishes, attacks, civil wars, and unrest have been a part of everyday Ukrainian life for the past decade, since the beginning of 2021, Russia has quietly amassed over 1 lakh troops on its borders with Ukraine. In December last year, Moscow released a set of demands that included a rollback of NATO's military operations in Eastern Europe and a promise that NATO would never admit Ukraine into its folds, which the organization has rejected. What's happening now? Well, the violent power struggle, which has faced various pressure peaks throughout history, is at one of the highest points of threshold now. In 2019, Zelensky met Putin for face-to-face peace talks to find long-term solutions. However, that ended in failure, and since then Ukraine has actively called for more negotiations, which Russia has turned down. So far, since 1991, it is well documented that over 13,000 people have died as a result of this conflict, and over 15 lakh people have been displaced according to UN figures, and even slightly more according to Ukraine's Council of Foreign Relations. As tensions continue to rise in Eastern Europe, the world now awaits to see when Russia will attack its neighbors, and whether the US and EU will do anything significant to stop the invasion of Europe's second largest country by the world's largest country. If things go south, this could be inadvertently the biggest war Europe has seen on its soil since the 1940s.